Hi, welcome back to Detective and Mystery Fiction. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. Mike or Alec or Rufus by Dashiell Hammett. First published Black Mask, January 1925. This story features the Continental Op. Mr. Hammett and his hard-boiled sleuth are too well known to Black Mask readers to need much of an introduction. That the following story is as interesting and surprising as any which Mr. Hammett has yet written is all we need to say to arouse your interest. I don't know whether Jacob Coplin was tall or short. All of him I ever got a look at was his round head, naked scalp and wrinkled face, both of them the color and texture of manila paper, propped up on white pillows in a big four-poster bed. The rest of him was buried under a thick pile of bedding. Besides he and I in the room that first time, there were his wife, a roly-poly woman with lines in a plump white face like scratches in ivory, his daughter Phyllis, a smart little Jewess of the popular member of the younger set type, and the maid who had opened the door for me, a big-boned blonde girl in apron and cap. I had introduced myself as a representative of the North American Casualty Company's San Francisco office, which I was, in a way. There was no immediate profit in admitting I was a Continental Detective Agency sleuth, just now in the Casualty Company's hire, so I held back that part. "I want a list of the stuff you lost," I told Coplin. "But first..." "Stuff?" Coplin's yellow sphere of a skull bobbed off the pillows, and he wailed to the ceiling. $100,000 if a nickel. And he calls it stuff. Mrs. Coplin pushed her husband's head down on the pillows again with a short-fingered fat hand. "Now, Jakey, donned Jed excited," she soothed him. Phyllis Coplin's dark eyes twinkled, and she winked one of them at me. The man in bed turned his face to me again, smiled a bit shamefacedly and chuckled. "Well, if you people want to call your $75,000 lost stuff, I guess I can stand it for $25,000. So it adds up to $100,000, I asked. "Yes. None of them were insured to their full value, and some weren't insured at all. That was very usual. I don't remember ever having anybody admit that anything stolen from them was insured to the hilt. Always it was half, or at most, 3/4 covered by the policy. "Suppose you tell me exactly what happened," I suggested, and added, to head off another speech that usually comes, "I know you've already told the police the whole thing, but I'll have to have it from you." "Well, we were getting dressed to go to the Bowers last night. I brought my wife's and daughter's jewelry, the valuable pieces, home with me from the safe deposit box. I had just got my coat on, and had called to them to hurry up with their dressing when the doorbell rang." "What time was this?" "Just about 8:30. I went out of this room into the sitting room across the passageway, and was putting some cigars in my case, when Hilda, nodding at the blonde maid, came walking into the room backwards. I started to ask her if she had gone crazy, walking around backwards, when I saw the robber. Just a moment. I turned to the maid. "What happened when you answered the bell?" "Why, I opened the door, of course, and this man was standing there, and he had a revolver in his hand, and he stuck it against my stomach, and pushed me back into the room where Mr. Coplin was, and he shot Mr. Coplin. And when I saw him and the revolver in his hand," Coplin took the story away from his servant, "it gave me a fright, sort of, and I let my cigar case slip out of my hand, trying to catch it again. No sense in ruining good cigars even if you are being robbed. He must have thought I was trying to get a gun or something. Anyway, he shot me in the leg. My wife and Phyllis came running in when they heard the shot, and he pointed the revolver at them, took all their jewels and had them empty my pockets. Then he made them drag me back into Phyllis's room, into the closet, and he locked us all in there. And, mind you, he don't say a word all this time. Not a word, just makes motions with his gun in his left hand. How bad did he bang your leg? Depends on whether you want to believe me or the doctor. He says it's nothing much. Just a scratch, he says, but it's my leg that's shot, not his. Did he say anything when you opened the door? I asked the maid. No, sir. Did any of you hear him say anything while he was here? None of them had. What happened after he locked you in the closet? Nothing that we knew about, Coplin said, until McBurney and a policeman came and let us out. Who's McBurney? The janitor. How'd he happen, along with a policeman? He heard the shot and came upstairs just as the robber was starting down after leaving here. The robber turned around and ran upstairs, then into an apartment on the 7th floor, and stayed there, keeping the woman who lives there, a Miss Eveleth, quiet with his revolver, until he got a chance to sneak out and get away. He knocked her unconscious before he left. And that's all. McBurney called the police right after he saw the robber, but they got here too late to be any good. How long were you in the closet? 10 minutes, maybe 15. What sort of looking man was the robber? Short and thin, and how short? About your height, or maybe shorter, about 5 feet 5 or 6, say. What would he weigh? Oh, I don't know, maybe 115 or 20. He was kind of puny. How old? Not more than 22 or 3. Oh, Papa, Phyllis objected. He was 30 or near it. What do you think? I asked Mrs. Coplin. 25, I'll say. And you? To the maid. I don't know exactly, sir, but he wasn't very old. Light or dark? He was light, Coplin said. He needed a shave and his beard was yellowish. More of a light brown, Phyllis amended. Maybe, but it was light. What color eyes? I don't know. He had a cap pulled down over them. They looked dark, but that might have been because they were in the shadow. How would you describe the part of his face you could see? Pale and kind of weak-looking, small chin, but you couldn't see much of his face. He had his coat collar turned up and his cap pulled down. How was he dressed? A blue cap pulled down over his eyes, a blue suit, black shoes and black gloves, silk ones. Shabby or neat? Kind of cheap-looking clothes needing pressing, awfully wrinkled. What sort of gun? Phyllis Coplin put in her word ahead of her father. Papa and Hilda keep calling it a revolver, but it was an automatic, A38. Would you folks know him if you saw him again? Yes, they agreed. I cleared a space on the bedside table and got out a pencil and sheet of paper. I want a list of what he got, with as thorough a description of each piece as possible, and the price you paid for it, where you bought it, and when. I got the list half an hour later. Do you know the number of Miss Eveleth's apartment? I asked as I reached for my hat. 702, 2 floors above. I went up there and rang the bell. The door was opened by a girl of 20-something, whose nose was hidden under adhesive tape. She had nice, clear hazel eyes, dark hair, and outdoor athletics written all over her. Miss Eveleth? Yes. I'm from the insurance company that insured the Coplin's jewelry, and I'm looking for information about the robbery. She touched her bandaged nose and smiled ruefully. This is some of my information. How did it happen? A penalty of femininity. I forgot to mind my own business, but what you want, I suppose, is what I know about the scoundrel. The doorbell rang a few minutes before 9 last night, and when I opened the door, he was here. As soon as I got the door open, he jabbed a pistol at me and said, "Inside, kid." I let him in with no hesitancy at all. I was quite instantaneous about it, and he kicked the door to behind him. "Where's the fire escape?" he asked. "The fire escape doesn't come to any of my windows, and I told him so, but he wouldn't take my word for it. He drove me ahead of him to each off the windows, but of course he didn't find his fire escape, and he got peevish about it, as if it were my fault. I didn't like some of the things he called me, and he was such a little half-portion of a man, so I tried to take him in hand. But, well, man is still the dominant male so far as I'm concerned. In plain American, he busted me in the nose and left me where I fell. I was dazed, though not quite all the way out, and when I got up, he had gone. I ran out into the corridor then and found some policemen on the stairs. I sobbed out my pathetic little tale to them, and they told me of the Coplin robbery. 2 of them came back here with me and searched the apartment. I hadn't seen him actually leave, and they thought he might be foxy enough or desperate enough to jump into a closet and stay there until the coast was clear. But they didn't find him here. How long do you think it was after he knocked you down that you ran out into the corridor? Oh, it couldn't have been 5 minutes, perhaps only half that time. What did Mr. Robber look like? Small, not quite so large as I, with a couple of days' growth of light hair on his face, dressed in shabby blue clothes with black cloth gloves. How old? Not very. His beard was thin, patchy, and he had a boyish face. Notice his eyes? Blue. His hair, where it showed under the edge of his cap, was a very light yellow, almost white. What sort of voice? Very deep bass, though he may have been putting that on. Know him if you'd see him again? Yes, indeed. She put a gentle finger on her bandaged nose. My nose would know, as the ads say anyway. From Miss Eveleth's apartment, I went down to the office on the first floor, where I found McBurney, the janitor, and his wife, who managed the apartment building. She was a scrawny little woman, with the angular mouth and nose of a nagger. He was big, broad-shouldered, with sandy hair and moustache, good-humoured, shiftless red face, and genial eyes of a pale and watery blue. He drawled out what he knew of the looting. I was a-fixin' a spigot on the 4th floor when I heard the shot. I went up to see what was the matter, and just as I got far enough up the front stairs to see the Coplin's door, the fella came out. We seen each other at the same time, and he aims his gun at me. There's a lot o' things I might have done, but what I did do was to duck down and get my head out o' range. I heard him run upstairs, and I got up just in time to see him make the turn between the 5th and 6th floors. I didn't go after him. I didn't have a gun or nothing, and I figured we had him cooped. A man could get out of this building to the roof of the next from the 4th floor, and maybe from the 5th. But not from any above that, and the Coplin's apartment is on the 5th. I figured we had this fella. I could stand in front of the elevator and watch both the front and back stairs, and I rang for the elevator and told Ambrose, the elevator boy, to give the alarm and run outside and keep his eye on the fire escape until the police came. The missus came up with my gun in a minute or two and told me that Martinez, Ambrose's brother, who takes care of the switchboard in the front door, was calling the police. I could see both stairs plain, and the fella didn't come down them, and it wasn't more'n a few minutes before the police, a whole pack of 'em, came from the Richmond station. Then we let the Coplins out of the closet where they were and started to search the building. And then Miss Eveleth came running down the stairs, her face and dress all bloody, and told about him being in her apartment, so we were pretty sure we'd land him. But we didn't. We searched every apartment in the building, but didn't find hide nor hair of him. Of course you didn't, Mrs. McBurney said unpleasantly. But if you had— I know, the janitor said with the indulgent air of one who has learned to take his pannings as an ordinary part of married life. If I'd been a hero and grabbed him and got myself all mussed up, well, I ain't foolish like old man Coplin getting himself plugged in the foot, or Blanche Eveleth getting her nose busted. I'm a sensible man that knows when he's licked, and I ain't jumping at no guns. No, you're not doing anything that. Mr. and Mrs. stuff wasn't getting me anywhere. So I cut in with a question to the woman. Who is the newest tenant you have? Mr. and Mrs. Gerald, they came the day before yesterday. What apartment? 704, next door to Miss Eveleth. Who are these Geralds? They come from Boston. He told me he came out here to open a branch of a manufacturing company. He's a man fat least 50, thin and dyspeptic looking. Just him and his wife? Yes. She's poorly too. Been in a sanatorium for a year or two. Who's the next newest tenant? Mr. Heaton in 535. He's been here a couple of weeks, but he's down in Los Angeles right now. He went away 3 days ago and said he would be gone for 10 or 12 days. What does he look like and what does she do? He's with a theatrical agency, and he's kind of fat and red-faced. Who's the next newest? Miss Eveleth. She's been here about a month. And the next? The Waginers in 923. They've been here going on 2 months. What are they? He's a retired real estate agent. The others are his wife and son Jack. A boy of maybe 19. I see him with Phyllis Coplin a lot. How long have the Coplins been here? It'll be 2 years next month. I turned from Mrs. McBurney to her husband. Did the police search all these people's apartments? Yeah, he said. We went into every room, every alcove and every closet from cellar to roof. Did you get a good look at the robber? Yeah. There's a light in the hall outside of the Coplin's door, and it was shining full on his face when I saw him. Could he have been one of your tenants? No, he couldn't. Know him if you saw him again? You bet. What did he look like? A little runt, a light-complected youngster of 23 or 4 in an old blue suit. Can I get hold of Ambrose and Martinez, the elevator and door boys who were on duty last night, now? The janitor looked at his watch. Yeah, they ought to be on the job now. They come on at 2. I went out into the lobby and found them together, matching nickels. They were brothers, slim, bright-eyed Filipino boys. They didn't add much to my dope. Ambrose had come down to the lobby and told his brother to call the police as soon as McBurney had given him his orders. And then he had beat it out the back door to take a plant on the fire escapes. The fire escapes ran down the back and one side wall. By standing a little off from the corner of those walls, the Filipino had been able to keep his eyes on both of them, as well as on the back door. There was plenty of illumination, he said, and he could see both fire escapes all the way to the roof, and he had seen nobody on them. Martinez had given the police a rap on the phone, and had then watched the front door and the foot of the front stairs. He had seen nothing. Neither of them had seen anyone in the building, either before or after the Coplins were turned for their jewels who fit the robber's description. I had just finished questioning the Filipinos when the street door opened and 2 men came in. I knew one of them, Bill Garron, a police detective on the pawnshop detail. The other was a small blonde youth, all flossy in pleated pants, short, square-shouldered coat, and patent leather shoes with fawn spats to match his hat and gloves. His face wore a sullen pout. He didn't seem to like being with Garron. What are you up to around here? The detective hailed me. The Coplin doings for the insurance company, I explained. Getting anywhere? He wanted to know. About ready to make a pinch, I said, not altogether in earnest and not altogether joking, the more the merrier. He grinned. I've already made mine. Nodding at the dressy youth. Come on upstairs with us. The 3 of us got into the elevator and Ambrose carried us to the 5th floor. Before pressing the Coplin's bell, Garron gave me what he had. This lad tried to soak a ring in a 3rd Street shop a little while ago. An emerald and diamond ring that looks like one of the Coplin lot. He's doing the clam now. He hasn't said a word. Yet. I'm going to show him to these people, then I'm going to take him down to the Hall of Justice and get words out of him. Words that fit together in nice sentences and everything. The prisoner looked sullenly at the floor and paid no attention to this threat. Garron rang the bell, and the maid Hilda opened the door. Her eyes widened when she saw the dressy boy, but she didn't say anything as she led us into the sitting room, where Mrs. Coplin and her daughter were. They looked up at us. "Hello, Jack," Phyllis greeted the prisoner. "Lo, Phil," he mumbled, "not looking at her among friends, huh? Well, what's the answer?" Garron demanded of the girl. She put her chin in the air, and although her face turned red, she looked haughtily at the police detective. "Would you mind removing your hat?" she asked. "Bill isn't a bad bimbo, but he hasn't any meekness." He answered her by tilting his hat over one eye and turning to her mother. "Ever see this lad before?" "Why, certainly," Mrs. Coplin exclaimed. "Thad's Mr. Wagner, who lives upstairs." "Well," said Bill, "Mr. Wagner was picked up in a hock shop trying to get rid of this ring." He fished a gaudy green and white ring from his pocket. "Know it?" "Certainly," Mrs. Coplin said, looking at the ring. "It belongs to my Phyllis." And the robber. Her mouth dropped open as she began to understand. How could Mr. Wagner? "Yes, how?" Bill repeated. The girl stepped between Garron and me, turning her back on him to face me. "I can explain everything," she announced. That sounded too much like a movie subtitle to be very promising, but Go ahead, I encouraged her. I found that ring in the passageway near the front door after the excitement was over. The robber must have dropped it. I didn't say anything to Papa and Mama about it, because I thought nobody would ever know the difference, and it was insured, so I thought I might as well sell it and be that much money in. I asked Jack last night if he could sell it for me, and he said he knew just how to go about it. He didn't have anything to do with it outside of that, but I did think he'd have sense enough not to try to pawn it right away. She looked scornfully at her accomplice. "See what you've done," she accused him. He fidgeted and pouted at his feet. "Ha, ha, ha," Bill Garron said sourly. "That's a nifty. Did you ever hear the one about the 2 Irishmen that got in the YWCA by mistake?" She didn't say whether she had heard it or not. "Mrs. Coplin?" I asked, making allowances for the different clothes and the unshaven face. "Could this lad have been the robber?" She shook her head with emphasis. "No, he could not be ID." "Set your prize down, Bill," I suggested, "and let's go over in a corner and whisper things at each other." "Right." He dragged a heavy chair to the center of the floor, sat Wagoner on it, anchored him there with handcuffs. Not exactly necessary, but Bill was grouchy at not getting his prisoner identified as the robber. And then he and I stepped out into the passageway. We could keep an eye on the sitting room from there without having our low-voiced conversation overheard. "This is simple," I whispered into his big red ear. "There are only 5 ways to figure the lay. First, Wagoner stole the stuff for the Coplins. Second, the Coplins framed the robbery themselves and got Wagoner to peddle it. Third, Wagoner and the girl engineered the deal without the old folks being in on it. Fourth, Wagoner pulled it on his own hook and the girl is covering him up. Fifth, she told us the truth. None of them explain why your little playmate should have been dumb enough to flash the ring downtown this morning, but that can't be explained by any system. Which of the 5 do you favor?" "I like 'em all," he grumbled, "but what I like most is that I've got this baby right. Got him trying to pass a hot ring. That suits me fine. You do the guessing. I don't ask for any more than I've got." That wasn't so foolish. "It doesn't irritate me any either," I agreed. "The way it stands, the insurance company can welch on the policies, but I'd like to smoke it out a little further, far enough to put away anybody who has been trying to run a hooligan on the North American. We'll clean up all we can on this kid, stow him in the can, and then see what further damage we can do." "All right," Garron said. "Suppose you get hold of the janitor and that Eveleth woman while I'm showing the boy to old man Coplin and getting the maid's opinion." I nodded and went out into the corridor, leaving the door unlocked behind me. I took the elevator to the 7th floor and told Ambrose to get hold of McBurney and send him to the Coplin's apartment. Then I rang Blanche Eveleth's bell. "Can you come downstairs for a minute or two?" I asked her. "We've a prize who might be your friend of last night." "Will I?" She started toward the stairs with me. "And if he's the right one, can I pay him back for my battered beauty?" "You can," I promised. "Go as far as you like, so you don't maul him too badly to stand trial." I took her into the Coplin's apartment without ringing the bell and found everybody in Jacob Coplin's bedroom. A look at Garron's glum face told me that neither the old man nor the maid had given him a nod on the prisoner. I put the finger on Jack Wagoner. Disappointment came into Blanche Eveleth's eyes. "You're wrong," she said. "That's not he." Garron scowled at her. It was a pipe that if the Coplins were tied up with young Wagoner, they wouldn't identify him as the robber. Bill had been counting on that identification coming from the 2 outsiders, Blanche Eveleth and the janitor, and now one of them had flopped. The other one rang the bell just then, and the maid brought him into the room. I pointed at Jack Wagoner, who stood beside Garron, staring sullenly at the floor. "Know him, McBurney?" "Yeah, Mr. Wagoner's son, Jack." "Is he the man who shooed you away with a gun last night?" McBurney's watery eyes popped in surprise. "No," he said with decision, and began to look doubtful. "In an old suit, cap pulled down, needing a shave. Could it have been him?" "No, oh, the janitor drawled. "I don't think so, though now that I come to think about it, there was something familiar about that fella, and maybe, by cracky, I think maybe you're right, though I couldn't exactly say for sure." "That'll do," Garen grunted in disgust. An identification of the sort the janitor was giving isn't worth a damn one way or the other. Even positive and immediate identifications aren't always the goods. A lot of people who don't know any better, and some who do, or should, have given circumstantial evidence a bad name. It is misleading sometimes, but for genuine, undiluted, pre-war untrustworthiness, it can't come within gunshot of human testimony. Take any man you like, unless he is the one in 100,000 with a mind trained to keep things straight, and not always even then. Get him excited, show him something, give him a few hours to think it over and talk it over, and then ask him about it. It's dollars to marks that you'll have a hard time finding any connection between what he saw and what he says he saw. Like this McBurney, another hour, and he'd be ready to gamble his life on Jack Wagner's being the robber. Garen wrapped his fingers around the boy's arm and started for the door. "Where to, Bill?" I asked. "Up to talk to his people. Coming along?" "Stick around a while," I invited. "I'm going to put on a party. But first tell me, did the coppers who came here when the alarm was turned in do a good job?" "I didn't see it," the police detective said. "I didn't get here until the fireworks were pretty well over, but I understand the boys did all that could be expected of them." I turned to Jacob Coplin. I did my talking to him chiefly because we, his wife and daughter, the maid, the janitor, Blanche Eveleth, Garen and his prisoner, and I, were grouped around the old man's bed, and by looking at him I could get at least a one-eyed view of everybody else. "Somebody has been kidding me somewhere," I began my speech. "If all the things I've been told about this job are right, then so is prohibition. Your stories don't fit together, not even almost. Take the bird who stuck you up. He seems to have been pretty well acquainted with your affairs. It might be luck that he hit your apartment at a time when all of your jewelry was on hand, instead of another apartment, or your apartment at another time. But I don't like luck. I'd rather figure that he knew what he was doing. He nicked you for your pretties, and then he galloped up to Miss Eveleth's apartment. He may have been about to go downstairs when he ran into McBurney, or he may not. Anyway, he went upstairs into Miss Eveleth's apartment looking for a fire escape. Funny, huh? He knew enough about the place to make a pushover out of the stick-up, but he didn't know there were no fire escapes on Miss Eveleth's side of the building. He didn't speak to you or to McBurney, but he talked to Miss Eveleth in a bass voice. A very, very deep voice. Funny, huh? From Miss Eveleth's apartment he vanished with every exit watched. The police must have been here before he left her apartment, and they would have blocked the outlets first thing. Whether McBurney and Ambrose had already done that or not, but he got away. Funny, huh? He wore a wrinkled suit, which might have been taken from a bundle just before he went to work, and he was a small man. Miss Eveleth isn't a small woman, but she would be a small man. A guy with a suspicious disposition would almost think Blanche Eveleth was the robber. Jacob Coplin, his wife, young Wagoner, the janitor and the maid were gaping at me. Garen was sizing up the Eveleth girl with narrowed eyes, while she glared white-hot at me. Phyllis Coplin was looking at me with a contemptuous sort of pity for my feeble-mindedness. Bill Garen finished his inspection of the girl and nodded slowly. She could get away with it, he gave his opinion. Indoors, and if she kept her mouth shut. Exactly, I said. Exactly my eye. Phyllis Coplin exploded. Do you two correspondence school detectives think we wouldn't know the difference between a man and a woman dressed in man's clothes? He had a day or two's growth of hair on his face. Real hair, if you know what I mean. Do you think he could have fooled us with false whiskers? This happened, you know, it's not in a play. The others stopped gaping and heads bobbed up and down. Phyllis is right, Jacob Coplin backed up his offspring. He was a man, knew him and dressed like one. His wife, the maid, and the janitor nodded vigorous endorsements. But I'm a bull-headed sort of bird when it comes to going where the evidence leads. I spun to face Blanche Eveleth. "Can you add anything to the occasion?" I asked her. She smiled very sweetly at me and shook her head. "All right, bum," I said. "You're pinched. Let's go." Then it seemed she could add something to the occasion. She had something to say, quite a few things to say, and they were all about me. They weren't nice things. In anger, her voice was shrill, and just now, she was madder than you'd think anybody could get on short notice. I was sorry for that. This job had run along peacefully and gently so far, hadn't been marred by any rough stuff, had been almost ladylike in every particular, and I had hoped it would go that way to the end. But the more she screamed at me, the nastier she got. She didn't have any words I hadn't heard before, but she fitted them together in combinations that were new to me. I stood as much of it as I could. Then I knocked her over with a punch in the mouth. "Here, here," Bill Garron yelled, grabbing my arm. "Save your strength, Bill," I advised him, shaking his hand off and going over to yank the Eveleth person up from the floor. "Your gallantry does you credit, and all the like of that. But I think you'll find Blanche's real name is Mike or Alec or Rufus." I hauled her or him, whichever you like, to his or her feet, and asked it, "Feel like telling us about it?" For answer I got a snarl. "All right," I said to the others. "In the absence of authoritative information, I'll give you my dope. If Blanche Eveleth could have been the robber, except for the beard and the difficulty of a woman passing for a man, why couldn't the robber have been Blanche Eveleth before and after the robbery by using a, strong depilatory on his face and a wig? It's hard for a woman to masquerade as a man, but there are lots of men who can get away with the feminine role. Couldn't this bird, after renting his apartment as Blanche Eveleth and getting everything lined up, have stayed in his apartment for a couple of days letting his beard grow? Come down and knock the job over, beat it upstairs, get the hair off his face, and get into his female rig in, say, 15 minutes? My guess is Thath could. And he had 15 minutes. I don't know about the smashed nose. Maybe he stumbled going up the stairs and had to twist his plans to account for it, or maybe he smacked himself intentionally. My guesses weren't far off, though his name was Frederick Agnew Rudd. He was known in Toronto, having done a stretch in the Ontario Reformatory as a boy of 19, caught shoplifting in his she-makeup. He wouldn't come through, and we never turned up his gun or the blue suit, cap and black gloves, although we found a cavity in his mattress where he had stuffed them out of the police's sight until later that night. When he could get rid of them, the Coplin sparklers came to light piece by piece when we had plumbers take apart the drains and radiators in apartment 702. End of Mike or Alec or Rufus by Dashiell Hammett.